Welcome, welcome to this day of gray gladness and snow. Yesterday's snow was the Twin Cities' collective April Fool's Day prank from nature, but we are in spring. I'm Reverend Kathleen Rolenz. I'm serving as your interim senior minister, and I'm sharing today's worship service with worship associate Jim Mulvey. I want to extend a very special welcome to all, to Unity Church, and those in person in the sanctuary, and those of you joining us online. Because of a special musical premiere today, I know that there are going to be many of you watching from Chorus America to celebrate the premiere of a commissioned piece honoring Unity member and former board chair Brian Newhouse. So welcome Chorus America and all those joining this morning via live stream. And after today's service, Jim and I look forward to meeting you either in person in the foyer, or those of you online are invited to a Zoom coffee hour. So again, it is a great joy to be with you in this act of worship, of gratitude, and of praise.
We enter into this season of Passover, Holy Week, and Ramadan, and we are inspired by the words and deeds of the prophets Mohammed, Jesus, and Moses, peace be upon them, who led us out of the wilderness, but who invited us to look deep within and to seek those things which free the spirit and unite the community. In this spirit, we say Hineni, which means, here I am, and here we are, as people of the book, as followers of the way, as believers in a better way of being together. In the spirit of Passover, may the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal, not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom.
Tis a gift to be.
I despise your festivals and take no delight in your solemn assemblies.
And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon.
Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps.
but let justice roll down like waters.
When I was a boy, my dad would come into my bedroom a couple nights a week, and he would say, "Time for prayer, boys." And my brother and I would climb out of bed and join him kneeling by our bed there in the dark. And that's where I learned, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name." 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I also learned the silent, physical acts of prayer. Fold your hands, bow your head, close your eyes. Even there in the bedroom dark, we closed our eyes to make it darker. These became the habits of prayer, and then these became the instincts of prayer, simply how you do it. You bow your head and close your eyes and go into that dark. Unity's building closed down for many, many months in the early going of the pandemic. All of us were barred from this room, and for all the right reasons. If you are a member here or had been attending for a long time, I wonder, what did you miss most about not being in this space? Was it the music? Was it the inspired and inspiring words said from the pulpit? Was it the sheer physical pleasure of sitting next to someone as you are today? All of us together, that powerful human need of connection. The first time my wife and I returned to Unity, it was a bright, sunny Sunday like we had yesterday here in St. Paul after the blizzard, the light falling through those windows in big, bold shafts right into the pews, lighting this reredos in such a beautiful glow. And it just was jaw-dropping to me, like how beautiful this space is, the beauty of falling light on wood and the gift of that light, the wonder of simply being alive and being here. And on that same Sunday, as is typical of our services, we were all asked to join in a moment of prayer for those in need. And just before I bowed my head and closed my eyes, I saw how many of the rest of us in the room do the same thing. We bow our head, we close our eyes, and something leapt up in me in that moment. I said, no, wait a minute. Look at all this light. Take that with you as you go into prayer. And I went home that day and wrote most of what you see in your bullet in front of you before prayer, never intending it to become public, just my own memo to self. Remember this. Remember all this light, all these gifts of beauty, of community, of agency, the ability to act, as Amos the prophet said, and we just read. Well, to make a long story short, these words found a wonderful composer, Carol Barnett, and these dear, dear friends who will bring it to life now. My hope is that we all might feel these gifts that shower us every second, every day. Before we kneel, before we bow and bend and search in the dark for words of the heart, lifetimes ago, the stars gave you their kindness, like a hand to graze your brow, to raise your head, to lay you back and wash your eyes clean. Earth ever turns past failure, past frost, past shadow and harm. Frozen fields break each spring and are blessed in rain and in dawn. These stars, this sun, before you kneel, before you bow and bend, see all this light.
O Holy One, source of radiance and relief, we do not bend or bow, but instead we raise our eyes to the hopes illuminated by this sacred moment. Be with us as our prayers expand the caring ministry of this congregation. For this beloved community holds us when we are born, when we die, and all that happens in between. And so this day we hold in prayer our parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children. We call to mind all those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We offer our support for those who care for family members in ill health and for those who are facing their final days. And we pray for the people of this courageous congregation as together we live into our longing to embody and help build the community, the beloved community. In this time of prayer, we hold in care these whom we now name. Ken Ford is hospitalized after another fall, and he is resting and healing, and Barbara, Sarah, and Ben are working to find appropriate transitional care for him. And there are those among us who do not wish to be named, but whose joys and struggles are ours as well. One among us is facing surgery. Another is worried about their child's mental health. One among us is enduring treatment for cancer. Another is caring for a loved one with dementia. We need not know their names to hold these and all those whom we hold in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. I invite you now to speak aloud or hold in your heart the names of those that you would like to lift in prayer today. O Holy One, this week we witnessed yet another mass shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee. There are no words to address the grief at losing a child, a teacher, a mentor, a friend. Our grief is complex. Our rage at the inability to pass effective legislation is real. And our hopes for a country in which these shootings are rare and uncommon, profound. We give thanks that a Minnesota House committee on Friday approved 4 gun control bills, and although it will not ease the grief of those lost to gun violence, it is a message of hope for our city and our nation. Holy One, we are a broken people, separated by violence and greed, and we are a whole and loving people, united in hope and determination that the least among us would be held and supported and cared for and safe. May these prayers not only be heard in the silence of our hearts, but in the halls of our legislators, in the minds of our representatives, and the conscience of all persons who hold places of influence, to build the common good and to make our days safe and just and fair. May the spirit of that which we call holy trouble the waters, rain down upon us like a mighty stream.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
The altar, thoughts on preparing the table for the Seder. Begin with stillness, summon courage, Kavanaugh, deliverance, essence, a beginning. Forsythia and flowers of spring, blossoms, purple iris for the table, tulips so pink they edge into blue. Gather your dearest, the lonely within and without. Hunger, bring your hunger, your fast. Indeed, there is much to recall and to hold here, to heal. Just about everything calls out to you to be done, and you must choose the things to most carefully. Kindness, stay kind. This is important. Bring your love of storytelling. Bring maror, matzah, mystery, mastery. All this is necessary. Open to the sacred, to the simple. Pausing, pass over the trifling annoyances, the broken, the missing. Make room for the quiet places that long to be seen. Remember the stories of your past. Conjure up spring and salvation. Sacrifice those things you no longer need. Remember the temples lost and burning in Paris, Jerusalem, in yourself. Reach out to the universe, calling out to you. Verify, purify your heart. Wake up to the pain of those around your table. Exonerate those who have not partaken, not delivered, not arrived, those who seek. Yearn for justice and freedom. Bring your zeal to the celebration. Bring yourself, your hashtags, your deep desire to connect. Hold and contain the past, the possible, time no longer linear.
I was shopping this week at Target, and I found myself at the checkout line, and the woman behind the cash register was a young woman in a hijab. I thought it was a safe bet that she was Muslim. And it was early in the morning, there was no one else behind me, so I asked her, "How is your Ramadan going?" And she said, "Well, we just finished the first week." And then I ventured, "Is it hard being around so much food all day while you're fasting?" And she said, "No, not really. I don't think about it." "Well, Ramadan Mubarak," I said, which meant wished her a blessed Ramadan. And it was a very simple exchange, but it also reminded me that Jews, Christians, and Muslims, this time of year and this week, will be celebrating some of the holiest religious observances in the liturgical calendar. And each one of these religious observances touch on the theme which begins this month's theme of sacrifice. So for Muslims, the daily practice of refraining from food, daytime eating and drinking, and from thinking impure thoughts requires a sacrifice of one's comforts and routines, particularly those built around food and drink. For Jews, their annual practice is different this week. This week begins Passover, and this season, observing Jews have rid their homes of hametz, or all bread or leavening products. And this week, they will remember the sacrifice made by their ancestors, whose hardships and liberation is recalled in the Seder meal and in the reading of the Haggadah. And for Christians, this first week of April this year begins Holy Week, which starts today, known as Palm Sunday. And it's the day that the story is told of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, and the people celebrating his entry by laying down palm branches in front of him. Holy Week unfolds with a much more somber story as Jesus is arrested as a threat to the state and condemned to die on the cross. And in the traditional interpretation of Jesus' life within most Christian traditions, his death is understood as the ultimate sacrifice, the sacrifice of one's life for the salvation of all humanity. So this is a rich and complex time for these three religious traditions, but each of these sacred times that these traditions are celebrating have something that they share together, this theme of sacrifice. And as Unitarian Universalists, we honor and recognize all three while not necessarily engaging in all the spiritual practices that these faiths require. We may go to a Seder, for example, but we don't scrub our homes of bread. We may do intermittent fasting, but we don't do it every day for a month. And maybe some of you might attend the Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday services coming up this week, but we don't hold an Easter vigil that keeps you up until sunrise on Sunday. Thank goodness. But it is worth asking ourselves, what does our faith teach us about sacrifice? So before I go much further, I have to confess, I have really struggled with this concept throughout my life, because the first place my mind goes is in the book of Genesis, when Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. There are many, many interpretations of this passage, and it could take up a year's worth of sermons. But the very idea of killing one's child because God said so, that first interpretation is still pretty rough. And then throughout the Hebrew scriptures, many pages are devoted to different kinds of sacrifice: grain, birds, sheep, goats, bulls. It can be, well, bloody. And then when we get to Jesus, and the most conventional understanding of his life and death as a perfect sacrifice for my sins, I just never have accepted that. So when I, or presumably we, found out that Unitarian Universalists don't believe in sacrifice as a theological or spiritual practice, maybe it relieves some of the tension or anxiety about this seemingly naive understanding of how the world really works. I mean, we don't get right with Yahweh by sacrificing a goat. We don't have to give up dessert to be spiritual. We don't have to sacrifice anything to be a religious person. Do we? Well, by way of an answer, we need to look at the root of that word sacrifice, and it comes from the Latin sacre, or to make holy, and it means to give something up for a higher purpose. So when most people think of sacrifice these days, we tend to go to the most extreme example of sacrifice. I think of, for example, those in military service who make the ultimate sacrifice in war. But sometimes that is for justifications that we later find questionable. I think of police officers who risk their lives, particularly the ones this week who charged into the school at Nashville, essentially sacrificing their safety to protect innocent lives. And of course, both military and police know that this is part of the job, but they are also asking our legislators why it is so easy for anyone in this country to become better armed than most police. And then there are the stories of people put in extraordinary circumstances who make unquestionable decisions to sacrifice for the lives of others. I think of the Russian activist Alexei Navalny, who had the chance to escape Putin's murderous regime and who willingly went back to Russia and was imprisoned for speaking the truth about Putin's Russia. So I just wondered, what good did he do, sacrificing his and his family's life for imprisonment and likely death at the hands of Russian authorities? But that's the thing that's so discomforting about sacrifice. We don't know what impact it may have in the larger scheme of things. We only know in the moment that it was the right thing to do. So one important aspect of this particular faith tradition of Unitarian Universalism is that we must go beyond our first impulse to either embrace or reject the stories we know, religious or secular. We are called instead to enter into those stories and ask ourselves what they mean to us, for our lives. We are called to ride into Jerusalem this week with Jesus to understand what that story means to us. We are invited to sit at the Seder table and eat matzah, though it may crumble dry in our throat. And we are challenged to fast in either body or spirit and refrain from those things which diminish our capacity for compassion. So even though we may not have explicit rituals that help us learn about sacrifice, we do have a community of faith and worship that can help us understand not only what this word means, but how we might engage in sacrifice that is life-affirming and life-sustaining. Not sacrifice born of violence or related to redemptive suffering, but sacrifice that nevertheless can be redemptive for us all. When Jesus journeyed into Jerusalem, I do not believe that he did this saying to himself, "This is all part of God's plan. I'm going to celebrate Passover with my friends. One of them's going to betray me to the authorities. I'll get arrested, tortured, and die a horrible death on the cross. But it's all going to be okay because centuries later, everyone will see that my death was the ultimate good." I don't believe that. I believe Jesus' greatest gift to us was being faithful to his own teachings, and as a result, rode into Jerusalem, and in the words of the late civil rights activist John Lewis, to make good trouble. That's a kind of sacrifice that cannot be found on any altar, except the one described in this morning's reading that you heard read by Jim. The poet Deborah Leipziger wrote this: "Sacrifice those things you no longer need. Temples lost and burning in Paris, Jerusalem, in yourself. Reach out to the universe, calling out to you. Verify, purify your heart. Wake up to the pain of those around your table." So if we no longer think about religious practice necessarily involving formal sacrifice, we can still inquire why it has been such a big part of human religious evolution. I think one answer goes back to Jesus. He was challenged by the Pharisees for allowing tax collectors and sinners to eat with him. And in response, he quotes the prophet Hosea, and he says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice, And Jesus understood that the practice of physical sacrifice was easy, and that the spiritual sacrifices we are required to make were much harder, and he believed more consistent with what God was calling human beings to do. It's not about slaying things on an altar. It's about examining your heart and your soul and your mind. The lost art of sacrifice requires us to search for those places in your own life and in our world where something or someone is suffering and ride towards that. Why? Well, my colleague, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, wrote this. She says, because we know that not a single thing is born without sacrifice, not a child, not a work of art, or a social justice movement. To be a parent, we sacrifice time for ourselves, our freedom, and a great deal of money. To create, we sacrifice our minds and hearts to the temporary obsession of work, of the work. To build social justice, people in dominant culture must be willing to give up our privatized privileges. So, this is where our understanding of sacrifice becomes more nuanced. The first step is to ask ourselves, what are we personally willing to give up for the greater good? Unitarian Universalism has long insisted on the individual's right, for example, for the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that has been crudely interpreted to mean I can think whatever I want. Well, that's true in some ways. There is no thought police here. But we do live in community with one another. Just as I can't yell fire in a crowded theater, nor can we be oblivious to the impact our beliefs and our speech have on each other and the wider world. It means that every opinion we offer must be considered in the context of community. Many years ago, I learned the acronym THINK, T-H-I-N-K, and I still use it. I try to use it before I speak. It asks, is what I'm about to say true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If I want to live that out, I have to sacrifice my tendency towards witty comebacks or snarky comments because they may not be true or helpful or necessary or inspiring or very kind. And although the sacrifice of one's free expression of one's speech may seem like a small sacrifice in comparison to life, it is nevertheless part of what I mean when I talk about the lost art of sacrifice. We sacrifice some of our egos, our personalities, our tendency to be witty or sarcastic or critical because we realize it is not building the common good. I mean, don't we do this with our interpersonal relationships? When you know someone well, it is so tempting to land that incisive critique. You know you're right, they know you're right, you've won the battle and lost the war. You've made your point and wounded your partner or your friend. You really told off that fellow church member, and now you can't greet them in coffee hour. Giving up that instinct to prove our point is a spiritual practice and a discipline that is worthy of our sacrifice in deference to the possibility of a more honest and meaningful relationship. You know, although the sacrifice of the free expression of one's speech may seem small in comparison to a life, it is nevertheless part of what it means to engage in this lost art of sacrifice. So the problem with how we think about sacrifice today in popular culture is that it is usually also devoid of any understanding of how power, privilege, and social position decide who and what is asked to be sacrificed. So a sacrifice that is imposed on us is not a sacrifice. It is an oppression. Whether Abraham was deciding to offer up his son Isaac, or when the neighborhood called Rondo here in St. Paul was broken apart and diminished to develop I-94, that is not a sacrifice. It is imposing one's will on another because you or the government believes that they know the greater good. And this is the spirit that I believe the prophet Amos was leaning towards when he said, I despise your religious festivals. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Instead, he says, let justice roll down like water and righteousness an never-failing stream. In other words, don't mistake an empty gesture towards justice for the real acts of justice. There is a greater good that we are called to sacrifice for and to. Gosh, I've been thinking a lot about this most recent school shooting in Nashville as it relates to this month's theme. And on my next point, you may not agree with me. I just want to say that right now. And it may open up a conversation that will enlighten us both. But I believe we must persistently ask each other to sacrifice some of the legal permissions we all enjoy under the constitutional right to own and bear arms. No civilian really needs to own a semi-automatic rifle. Now, those who are gun collectors may have an understandable reason for owning a high-capacity assault weapon, but honestly, the fact that an irresponsible or emotionally unstable person can purchase an assault rifle as easily as a law-abiding citizen means that something, somewhere, must give. Can we sacrifice some of the individual permissions and pleasures our Constitution guarantees for the greater good? At what point do we realize that our personal lifestyle means death for someone else? Now, I lifted up a very dramatic example of assault weapons, but there are other ways in which we are called to sacrifice for the greater good. I'm countering my tendency to buy disposable clothing, for example, knowing that it likely exploits someone else across the world, and it's probably going to wind up in a landfill that will never be digested by the earth. And I'm rethinking my relationship to plastic, to fossil fuels, to energy, to all those things which make a disposable life so easy and so deadly for our planet and for our future. And I'm aspiring to follow the example of my Muslim friend at Target, giving up these things as something, as she said, that I just don't think about. These are sacrifices that I do or am working towards doing because sacrifice requires us to give up something of worth for a greater good. Now, in ancient times, sacrifice always required an altar. And on that altar, the seeds for next year's plantings were offered, the first fruits of the harvest were laid, and yes, animals were slaughtered with the hopes of appeasing a needy God. Today's altars are different, but they still require something from us. We learn to sacrifice our egos and individualism for the sake of community. For those of us who believe ourselves to be white, we sacrifice whatever privilege we've been given for a deeper understanding of equality. For the sake of our planet, we sacrifice some measure of comfort and ease for the survival of the future. For the sake of our children and grandchildren and the generations to come, we sacrifice our need to protect ourselves by violent means and work towards peaceful ends. There is no guarantee that our sacrifices will result in a good harvest, an equitable community, a sustainable planet. Yet to do so is an act of faith. So remember that poem, Altar, that reminds us what we need to do. Conjure up spring and salvation, she writes. Sacrifice those things you no longer need. Verify, purify your heart. Wake up to the pain of those around your table. Exonerate those that have not partaken, not delivered, not arrived. Those who seek, yearn for justice and freedom. Bring your zeal to the celebration. The lost art of sacrifice does not require mourning and lamentation. Instead, it asks us to also bring our zeal to the celebration of this one wild, precious life that we share. May it be so.
Your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to each other and to the world. The contributions you make enable us to do the work we have pledged to do within our church community and out in the world. The larger portion of our offering will be shared with Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, an organization aiming to enhance opportunities for immigrants and refugees by providing statewide legal services to low-income clients, regardless of nationality or legal status. ILCM is a local leader in the drive to promote compassionate and fair immigration reform, and this collection will help their clients secure legal status and overcome barriers to obtaining work authorization and citizenship. Will the ushers please come forward? Please give as generously as you can today. We dedicate these offerings and ourselves to the greater work of the church, which is weaving a tapestry of love we call community.
Our community life is an extension of all that you have witnessed today, and Unity Church provides you with opportunities to reflect on those things which give our lives value and meaning. We are mindful of the fact that our building resides on the homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe Nations, and we honor with gratitude the people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations and their ongoing contribution to this region. We celebrate the fact that Pope Francis recently denounced the doctrine of discovery, the papal bull which inaugurated a period of colonization with devastating impact, particularly on indigenous communities. So may this renouncement lead to greater and deeper healing. We welcome you to the Parish Hall after today's service. There you can greet today's Parish Hall artist, Angie Mallon, visit the Gun Sense team table, and meet and greet one another after the service. All members are encouraged to seek out and welcome visitors and guests. And if you are a visitor today, you are invited to attend the Finding Yourself at Unity conversation held in the Gannett Room upstairs at 10:15. We are so grateful for our artist in residence, Gino O'Cook, and all of you who worked together to complete the mural on the lower level. They are vibrant and welcoming, and we hope that you will take this opportunity to see them this morning downstairs. And finally, this is the last day to receive applications for the ministerial search team. So end of business, end of the day today. So if you are considering applying, you may find a simple form on the church's website, and we encourage you to do so. So as Christian communities celebrate the entrance into Holy Week, we close now with a hymn that reminds us of a man born, one more Redeemer, whose life and legacy we still reflect on today. Number 276. Go forth from this place, taking from this altar a hope, a blessing, a prayer, and inspiration. and a memory of those who have sacrificed something for us. Go forth from this day in peace. May it be so. Amen.